what I'm working on is my first quilt. So I'm going to take each of these squares and I roughly outlined my design, and I'm going to embroider each of these squares. So I have 16 cut out and pinned together, and I still have some blanks that I need to draw my designs on, and I'm getting some of my motif ideas from this hand sewn book by Margaret Rowan. I borrowed it from the library. I love going to the library, and this project is going to serve a couple purposes. One, it's going to help me put together my first quilt, but also I'm going to use these hand embroidered squares to kind of go back in time over 30 years ago when my grandmother taught me how to embroider. So this book goes through every single embroidery stitch ever, and that'll actually refreshen my memory on some of the stitches. For example, like this little girl, she is adorable. So I roughly drew her on this square, and so when I get to this square, this block, I'm going to follow the stitches on the back, and then back in the back of this book, they actually tell you what stitches were used. Let me see if I can find it real quick. There she is. Alright, so to make this little girl, use the back stitch, French knots, long and short blanket stitch, satin stitch, sheaf stitch, stem stitch, single satin stitch. So when I'm done, this little girl should be on my quilt square. Now, what I did was I bought some inexpensive unbleached or bleached muslin, and I cut a square of thin backing, and I'll stack these. I'll make that quilt sandwich, and I just pinned it together with a straight pin, and then I cut out 16 of those. Then I'm going back to the blanks. Oh, real quick, I decided on this hoop. It is the 4-inch hoop. So I wanted to try to get all of these uniform. So every square is the same size, and the backing is also the same size. I took my hoop, placed it in the middle of the square, and then took my fabric pencil. Let's see if I can find a label here. Aunt Martha's pencil. You can see I laid this down, laid the hoop down, and I traced the inside. And I did that to all 16 squares. That way, they're going to be uniform. So when I go in and do my crazy quilting, because this should be a crazy quilt, I'm hoping, and it might. Oh, anyways, whenever I go back in and start sewing them together as a quilt, I want them to be uniform. At least when I frame it with the material. That'll be later in a different video. Now I don't know if all 16 squares are going to be on one quilt, or if I will separate them into maybe 4 quilts, because I have 4 daughters and I want each of them to have a handmade quilt. So I haven't decided yet, but at least I've got started with this. Alright, it's Stephanie Grams. You can find me at mysewingneedle.com. Bye guys.